A free trade agreement, sometimes called a free trade treaty, is a law that reduces the cost and regulatory burden of trading between two or more states. There are many theories as to the ideal way to do international trade, with some economists and politicians positing that complete, free, and open trade is the way to go, because it allows goods and services to cross borders completely unencumbered, which in turn allows businesses in different countries to really lean into whatever they're good at, selling their cars to countries that are less good at making cars, while that recipient country maybe produces soybeans or computer chips or whatever it is they're good at making. And then they send those in the other direction, likewise unburdened by stiff tariffs or regulatory hurdles. Each country can thus produce the best product cheapest and sell it to the market where their products are in high demand, while they, in turn, benefit from the same when it comes to other products and services that they do not specialize in making. This theory leans on the idea that everyone is better off when everyone does what they're best at, rather than trying to do everything not as well. Specialization. But those who oppose this conception of international trade argue that this creates and reinforces asymmetries between different nations and businesses. A country that's really good at producing soybeans may be at a substantial disadvantage if the country that makes cars ever decides to go to war with them, because the soybean country will not have the existing infrastructure to build tanks or drones or bullets, while the country that specializes in computer chips might hold all the cards over an opponent when it comes to generating economic pressure against that opponent or other would-be enemies, because such chips are in everything these days, from military hardware to kitchen appliances. This also creates potential frailties for countries that specialize in, for instance, buggy whips, only to have a new technology like the automobile come around and put a significant chunk of their total economy out of business basically overnight. This theory may also leave local businesses that don't lean into a regional strength kind of in the lurch. If a country with a decent-sized automobile industry decides to leave their borders completely open to international competition, there is a chance that could light a fire under those local producers, forcing them to become more competitive. But there's also a chance it could just collapse the market for local offerings. Their cars might no longer be desirable because the international stuff flooding across the borders from a nation that has heavily prioritized making cars are just that much better and cheaper, whether naturally or artificially, because of subsidies by that foreign government meant to help their local businesses take out the international competition. This is why most nations have all sorts of tariffs, regulations, and other trade barriers erected between them and their trading partners, and why those trade barriers are ultra-specific, different for every single possible trade partner. The goal is to make international options less appealing by making them more expensive, or by making it trickier for foreign competition to smoothly and quickly get their products onto your shelves, while still making those things available in a volume that aligns with local consumer demands, and then ideally making it easier and cheaper for your stuff to get onto their shelves. The negotiation of all of this is massively complicated because country A might want to favor their soybean farmers, who are an important voting bloc, and country B might want to do the same for their car industry because tax income from that industry is vital. And these two governments will thus do what they can to ensure their favored local industries and businesses have the biggest leg up as possible in as many foreign markets as possible, without giving away so much to their trade partners that they create worse situations for other industries and businesses and the people who run them on the home front as a consequence. What I'd like to talk about today is a recent massive and potentially quite vital trade deal that was struck in early 2026 and what it might mean for global trade. You're listening to Let's Know Things. I'm Colin Wright. I'm able to keep this show ad-free because of support from listeners like you. If you're finding value in what I'm doing here, consider becoming a paid supporter for the cost of a cup of coffee each month at letsknowthings.com. And as a thank you for your helping me keep this show solvent, you'll receive an additional bonus More Things episode each month. All right, let's get back to the show. At the tail end of January 2026, the European Commission announced that they had struck what they called the mother of all deals with India. This deal, the culmination of 2 decades worth of negotiation, its tenets impacting about 2 billion people and around a quarter of the world's total GDP. The agreement, as is the case with most such agreements, is fairly complex, but in essence, it reduces or eliminates tariffs on 96.6% of all EU goods exported to India, which means about 4 billion euros of annual duties that would have otherwise been paid on European products in India will disappear, a savings for Indian customers and a boon for European producers whose products will now be cheaper in India. This is expected to be especially beneficial for European automakers like Volkswagen, Renault, and BMW, which have long been weighed down by a 110% tariff in India. That tariff will be reduced to as little as 10% on the first 250,000 vehicles sold following this agreement. Lower-priced vehicles will still face high tariffs to help protect India's local car makers, but electric vehicles will benefit from a 5-year grace period, as India has been focusing on allowing as many cheap, renewable energy assets and infrastructure into their country as possible, regardless of where those things come from. Tariffs on machinery, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals coming from the European Union will be almost entirely eliminated, down from tariff rates of 44%, 22%, and 11% respectively. Wine, which has long been tariffed at a rate of 150%, will be cut to between 20% and 30% for many varieties, and spirits from the EU coming into India will see 150% tariffs cut down to 40%. On the other side of this deal, the EU will also open its market to Indian goods, reducing tariffs on about 99.5% of all such goods, including seafood, textiles, gems and jewelry, leather goods, plastic products, and toys. Several of these categories, like Indian seafood, textile making, and other labor-intensive industries, have had a rough time of late because of high U.S. tariffs enforced by President Trump's second administration. So this is being seen as a significant win for them, those people in those industries in India in particular. Interestingly, while the reduction in trade barriers is substantial here, and the number of people and industries and amount of money that's involved is massive, this deal does not include, and in some cases explicitly excludes, any agreements related to labor rights, climate commitment, or environmental standards, which means that while the European Union has thus far been pretty strict in terms of ensuring products from outside align with their policies and values regarding things like carbon emissions and ensuring goods are not produced by people laboring in slave-like conditions, this deal falls short of such enforcements, allowing India to operate with relative impunity with regards to those issues at least, and to still sell with dramatically reduced barriers on the European market. That is a big deal, and is perhaps the biggest indicator of just how badly the EU wanted to make this deal happen. The EU was also able to keep significant protections in place for important local sectors like beef and chicken, dairy, rice, and sugar, all industries in which India would have liked to compete in the EU, but which, because of those maintained barriers, they practically can't. That would likely have been a feverishly negotiated topic, and it is likely an indicator of just how much India wanted this deal to work too. On that note, both India and the EU were apparently especially interested in making this multi-decade deal work now because of increasing pressure from China on one side and the United States on the other. China has been rerouting many of its cheap products that would have previously gone to the US market elsewhere, engaging in what is often called dumping, which slowly but surely puts businesses that produce comparable products at a profit locally in those target markets out of business because they dump a bunch of cheap versions of those products there, at which point these Chinese companies can then ratchet up their prices and profits, operating without real competition, the competition that they put out of business by dumping. The EU and India have both been targeted by Chinese companies taking this approach, because they are still producing at a feverish pace, and because US tariffs and the general unpredictability and irregularity of US policy overall under the second Trump administration has forced them to start firing their cheap product cannon more intensely at other large markets instead. And India and the EU are the next two big markets in line right now after the US and China. On the US side of things, those same tariffs have been hurting companies in both the EU and India, that would otherwise have been shipping their goods to the rich and spendy US market. And in many cases, these tariffs have been fine-tuned to hurt important local industries as much as possible, because that is one of Trump's main negotiating tactics, to lead with pain and then negotiate to take some of the pain away. This deal then serves multiple purposes in that it creates a valuable, newly polished trade relationship between a rich and powerful existing bloc and the newly most populous country on the planet, which is also rapidly expanding economically and rapidly empowering geopolitically. One last point to note here, though, is that the European Union has been trying to create these sorts of mutually beneficial deals with non-US partners for years now. And the two most recent wins, trade deals with the South American trade bloc and with Indonesia in early January 2026 and in September of 2025 respectively, have borne mixed results. The deal with Indonesia seems to be moving forward apace. And while it's a heck of a lot smaller than the India deal, only worth about 27 billion euros, that's still important, as Indonesia is increasingly vital, both economically and geopolitically, especially in a Southeast Asia that is slowly reinforcing itself against China's economically and potentially militarily expansionist tendencies. The deal with that South American bloc, however, was referred to the EU Court of Justice in mid-January for legal review, due to its lack of alignment with other EU treaties, and that could delay or even prevent its ratification. This new mother of all deals with India could likewise face holdups, or it could fizzle before being implemented. Though most analysts who are keeping eyes on this are seeing it not just as an economic agreement, but a gesture of solidarity at a moment in which China and the US are signaling their intent, quite brazenly, to carve up the world into hemispheric hegemonies. And when those who might otherwise be forced into subordinate positions are scrambling to figure out who they can team up with to create counterbalancing forces capable of standing up to current and future aggression and coercion. There is a chance that even if politics and propriety threaten to get in the way then, India and the EU will figure out a way to work together on this and potentially other matters of global import. The book I'd like to recommend today is called The Kill Chain: Defending America in the Future of High-Tech Warfare by Christian Brose. This book is considered to be a favorite amongst many of the people who are trying to build the companies that are meant to supply the US government and its military with the weapons of the future. The idea is that war is changing, defense is changing, a lot of the old ways of doing things, even as recent as the early 2000s, no longer apply because of the change in technique and the change in technology that's happened in the decades since then. A lot of the newer systems that are actually going to matter in the future of warfare and things that are close to warfare that maybe prevent warfare are going to be automated systems with varying degrees of humans in the loop. And so this book gets into what that actually looks like, what those future systems might turn out to be, some of the pros and cons and concerns that we should have about them, but then also what sorts of consequences there might be for the militaries that do not start working on these problems today, as opposed to sometime in the future when they are then scrambling to get something done because they're being attacked or need to defend somebody. Now, if any of that sounds interesting to you, consider picking up a copy of The Kill Chain by Christian Brose. Let's Know Things is a listener-supported show. I don't make any money from ads, only what listeners contribute by becoming paid supporters at letsknowthings.com. If you're not in the position to become a paid supporter at the moment, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your pods. Those help get the show in front of more people and lend a hint of credibility to independently made shows like this one. A huge thanks in advance, whatever shape your support might take.